Hello and welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast dedicated to igniting your entrepreneurial spirit and empowering you to conquer new horizons. In this podcast, we chat with inspiring entrepreneurs on their journey to success through some amazingly insightful and expansive conversations. These episodes thrive on thought-provoking chats where our guests fearlessly explore their path to success, sharing their experiences, failures, and triumphs. No topic is off limits as we deep dive into the talked about and not so talked about pieces it takes to build a business, overcome limiting beliefs, deal with personal struggles, and everything in between that shapes our lives and our businesses. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, creator and founder at The Lotus Effect, where we believe that success is not just about strategies and tactics, it's about cultivating a powerful mindset and creating customized business operations that align with you and your true purpose. Whether it's mastering time management, improving productivity, enhancing leadership skills, or simply fostering a growth-oriented mindset, we'll provide you with the tools and strategies to flourish in both your business and personal life. I'm so excited to have you join us today in this episode, so get ready to feel empowered and inspired as we learn together and from one another on how to rise above challenges, break through limitations, and unlock our full potential. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I am so excited to have you here with me today, and I have a awesome, fun-loving guest. Like, we're going to have so much fun. Him and I have had some awesome conversations already. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Oh, Kat, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really honored to be here. Just really looking forward to sharing whatever I can with your audience, man.
Oh, I'm so excited. We've had so much fun. So there's already been several nuggets. I love Andrew's spirit and all of his energy. So, and you guys know how I am about that. So, Andrew, as we jump into the podcast, please tell everybody then who you are, what it is that you do, and what got you into your space.
Sure. So I am a Keynote Architect. And what that is I help entrepreneurs structure keynote talks. And so I have a framework that I use for it. This started off, so I want you to imagine this for me, okay? You're standing in front of an FDA auditor in the middle of an audit. I was working for one of the large pharma companies, and they have no discernible sense of humor. So when he turns to me, this training that I had presented to him, he turns to me and goes, "Is this meant to help them or is this meant to punish them?" I realized I needed to make a change. There's a brief cardiac event that happened right after that. Because my boss is there, my boss's boss is there, like 4 compliance lawyers. It was an unpleasant experience. So what had happened is up to that point, I had been in the learning industry right now for about 20 years. And I've trained literally tens of thousands of people. I've built all kinds of training courses. And what I realized in that moment is what I was committing was academic assault. And there had to be a better way to do this. For me, it was like, I didn't want to be that person that was making crappy presentations. I didn't want to be that person that people were falling asleep, and I didn't want to be that person that really created these terrible things. And so fast forward a number of years. My mom wrote a book. It's called Syndrome Why. She was a psychologist. And after 30 years of practice, decided to publish a book for herself. And one of the things that we were doing when we were trying to promote her book was to do a TED Talk. And so I looked at all the criteria for TED Talk, did a bunch of research on this, and fell in love with it. I really love TED Talks. The process, there's actually a structure to them. The process they use to go through this, it's very story-based, but it still can transfer a lot of information. Think about it. When we were younger, when we were kids, what was the best way for you to learn? You heard a story from your grandfather and they told you something and you remember it to this day. And if that was the easiest way for us to learn, and something clicked in my mind and said, here's my better way. Because for me, I come from a line of speakers. My mother is an amazing speaker. My grandfather was an amazing speaker. I come from a line of speakers, but that had to be that one moment that I had where it's like, I can make something of this. This is something that I not only have a passion for, but it's also something that I can do to leave my mark on the world. And so that's where I came from. Because for me, it's a duty to help entrepreneurs to be able to go and do the best they can in front of audiences and to be able to spread their special wisdom into audiences. So that's the brief version. So that TED Talk was about 7 years ago. I have written one other since, and but mostly what I've done is these presentations. They've been sales presentations. They've been, origin stories. They've been all of this stuff. I get to tell other people's stories. And I get to use those stories to help them to kind of propagate what they do in their own special zone of genius.
I love that. That's such a killer actual introduction. And I love Keynote Architect. I just think that that's so unique. When you think about the way that people build things and the way that they break it down, and, architects, in my personal opinion, I have one that's in my family as well, that, they're very detailed. They pay attention to all the little things, and make sure that it's all in the correct place, right? Because they are what kind of holds it together as the plans get handed off to somebody else and they take it, right? So I love it that you play this integral role in it. And I love that you noticed that you didn't want to be the one putting people to sleep.
Yeah, no, I don't. Again, it's academic assault. I don't want to deal with this. Dude.
I love your wording. Academic assault. That one's going to stick with me now. That's going to be a term that gets used quite often.
If you've been in the medical industry, there's so much regulation around it that this is most of the training that we create.
It is so much. I was in the medical industry for 10 years, and I can't tell you how many trainings and things that I sat through that I was like, oh my God, are we done yet? Oh, it's only been 10 minutes. Okay. Well, we've got a really long ways to go. And you know, what's really interesting too, is I feel like there are so many people that really are starting to shift into craving that natural connection. And in my personal opinion, the natural connection comes from not only who you are and being able to share the emotions and just a piece of you when you're telling things, but coming from a space of sharing something that maybe isn't perfect, that maybe has some flaws in it, that actually shows true colors. And I feel like we're kind of moving into this segue, and I'm sure that COVID had some to do with it as well, because we were on such tight lockdown where people are craving some type of interaction that they would normally get when you're just sitting down and having coffee with a friend, right? We're all so sick of being taught the old way, or the structured A, B, C, point A system. And I feel like there's a beautiful way to be able to still share that structure and have fun with it and be a little bit lighthearted, but get your point across to where people, like you said, actually pay attention to you. They're not falling asleep in the front row because you've made it so systematic that there is no emotion, no connection, no intention behind it. It's just facts and words.
And one of the things that happens, it's really an interesting concept, because this is what happens when your mom's a shrink, because stuff like this. It's kind of part of it. What happens is when you speak and you're telling a personal, emotionally based story, and you're being vulnerable and authentic, what ends up happening is the audience's brainwaves sync with yours, and you create a mastermind. It's a really interesting concept. So there's a few reasons why I do story-based. That's part of it, because we learn emotionally. We all hear right brain, left brain. There are cells in our brain that permeate our entire brain that are triggered by emotion. We are just physiologically designed to be emotional creatures and to respond to emotion. That's why, with the Coca-Cola commercials, what the hell does Coca-Cola have to do with a polar bear? Nothing at all, or very, very little. It might be a cold beverage, but that's about it. What it does is advertisers know that it tugs at our emotional heartstrings, and we will have a more of an affinity for that specific brand. So you build this tribe around you. Russell Brunson calls it the attractive character. And so you build this tribe around you of people that you can help emotionally and actually in their business. It propagates what you're trying to do. It builds your brand. And you now have this group of just rabid evangelists who will say, dude, this, what Kat does, dude, Kat is so awesome what she does. I will, no matter what happens, if she puts it out, I will buy it. And then they will tell all of their friends about it, and they'll be like, dude, Kat's totally awesome, man. I love her to death. She's gonna do. And you see this. And so anyway, the part of it, that's one of the things we really don't think about when it comes to storytelling. Another part about storytelling that I really love is It's difficult for people to speak. So let me pivot for a
Mm.
second here and just say one of the reasons it's difficult for people to speak is they're worried about being judged. And my response to that at all times is just remember that the audience is happier that you're up there and they're not. And if they were to judge you, they can come up with you. And it's one of those things that clears the playing field. So right there, that stops
Yeah.
that. But people have difficulty telling, giving their brand of expertise in a way that's coherent that mere mortals can understand. I was having a conversation with a client of mine who's become a good friend over the years, and he was so frustrated. He's like, "Why aren't people getting this?" And I'm like, "Look, bud, you can jump from point A to point F in a single bound. You've been doing this for almost 20 years. You're really good at what you do. Other people need B, C, D, and E to fill in the blanks to make it work."
Hmm.
And so that's something that makes it difficult. Goes back to a meme that I heard. It's like, have you ever heard somebody you know is brilliant but couldn't communicate? And the response was, "Have you met an engineer?" From a line of engineers. So, but it's that thing where that person's brilliant, but they can't communicate it effectively. Using a
Yeah.
story, take me back. And I use terms when I'm working with a client, like, take me back to that moment. Describe what was going on. Tell me what color clothes you were wearing. Take me back to that period. People can describe that usually pretty well. And with a little bit of help, they can use those stories to segue them into the information that they need. So there's a lot to it. Yeah, it's kind of
I
fun.
love that. But you know what? You're so right too, because I do think that, well, we all have a huge fear of being judged.
Yes.
And something I learned from someone a while back that was on my podcast that stuck with me was they said, anytime that you feel like you are being judged for something, look at that, because more than likely you are judging someone for that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was one of the coolest things to look at. And I actually use that in my own life to really look at, like, how am I judging myself and how is that reflecting in the way that I judge others? And it was really an interesting dynamic to pick apart and realize that a lot of the times our fears that we have aren't necessarily based in the outside world. They're based on our own fears, but we project them as if it's something else because that's easier for our brains to understand. And then you can make excuses, right? And if I can make an excuse, well, but they're going to think this, they're going to think that, then it's easier to not step into that fear, which again is what the brain wants to do, right? To completely protect you and keep you in the space that it understands. So it really is fascinating to me the way that the brain can create these stories, project them out as something else. We think that it's an outside source when in reality, it is totally and completely inside of us. So that to me is mind-blowing when I learned that. And then the second part is you're so right. I think that some of us, because we have gone through things, we want to try to pull the facts out and say, well, this is what happened. This is what I did. This is where I'm going. When in reality, what people are looking for is that connection on some level. And like you said, within storytelling, in my personal opinion, it's so much easier to relate to other things, even if you haven't been through it, because now there is a visual, now there is a description, now there is something to play along with and follow. Even if you're an auditory listener, you're still pulling that into your brain and following, just like if you were reading a book, right? I've read some books that they're amazing books and they have some really great points. And I got halfway through and was like, I can't anymore. Like, this is the same thing. I feel like we're on repeat. There's nothing that's relatable to it. I get a short story like every 10 chapters. Like, I can't. I feel like I'm sitting in school reading a document. But when I find those, like Brene Brown is one of my favorite people to read. The way that she talks about shame, guilt, and vulnerability, and the way that she ties her own stories into it, even though I may not have been in some of the same situation she has, the emotional connection is so deep that I feel like I'm actually there. I feel like I'm witnessing it, and I want to be able to get to the other side to see that end result. And that sticks so much more than when we try to stay surface level.
Absolutely. Have you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad?
I have not. It is on my
Okay.
list, though.
So Rich Dad Poor Dad is a really good example of this because it was written by Sharon Lechter, and so her mentor of mine is good friends with her. Sharon's style is very storytelling, and so it's an easy read, but there's a hell of a lot of information in there, and so it's interesting that she uses that style. And this is like the number one book I can remember many years ago. I decided that no matter it doesn't matter who you are. Real estate is the common denominator, like for wealthy people. It's just a thing. It's just real estate, something in real estate. I flipped a house. That's how I got my haircut.
It was a heck of a house.
It was a heck of a house. There's a lot of stories there. But one of the things that she knows how to do is to relate it to a story. And so I was looking for something, to get into. And yeah, the podcast that I was listening to was Bigger Pockets. And the one question they ask at the end of all of their podcasts is, what's one book that's really changed your life? And I'd say 90% of the people said Rich Dad, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, hands down.
Wow.
That or Think and Grow Rich. I mean, it was a huge thing.
That's the other one.
So it was one of those things where it's like, there's something to this. One of the most influential books in real estate was written in a storytelling style.
Which is really interesting because with somebody that was in real estate, there's so many things that are not storytelling and so many things you have to learn and understand, and just there's so many facts to it. But I will say that having those conversations with my clients when I was working with them and being able to relate it back to like another client, this is a situation we handled, this is how bad it got, like this is not that, we're totally good. Like being able to bring in that relatability just ties in so many pieces that again, I feel is extremely organic, a lot more natural. You're not having to force your view, force your perception, or try to get someone to understand you, because it's just naturally there. And that to me makes it 10 times easier, because I used to be the person that had to like explain everything. And now being able to relate it back, even with my kids, when I'm talking with my kids and things that they're going through, I relate it back to things that I've been through. And I take them through the emotions and we talk about it, and I allow them to ask me questions like, well, why did you think that you should do that? Like we go through those pieces, but that sticks with my kids, especially at 20 and 16, 10 times more than me just saying, this is what you should do. You shouldn't do it because this is going to happen. Like I swear to you, it just goes in one ear and out the other. But being able to share those pieces has made a huge difference in how my kids actually listen to what I have to say too.
Yeah. And the one nice thing about storytelling is that, and especially when it's storytelling and presentations, you have taken the judgment out of it, because now it's someone else. Now it's somebody else's story, whether it's the presenters or whether it's a story they're telling about, some client. You've taken that judgment out of it. And so people will be able to learn from it without feeling judged. They'll just resonate. And that's, I think, a big change that happens between just talking at somebody and telling a story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, okay, I got to ask you a question that I know that everyone is probably thinking right now. And that is, Andrew, I've never told stories. I don't tell, how the hell am I even going to begin telling stories? What does that look? I have so many stories in my head. Which ones are relevant? Where's that starting point for someone that maybe is used to being in that really logical space, engineers, scientists, IT, things like that? Where do you even begin to understand what stories can be used and to kind of reframe that mindset?
So anyone that says they've never told a story, I will call BS on, because you probably have. You may not have done a good job at it, but you have told a story. And the thing is that about really, really good storytellers have the ability, just the intrinsic ability to do a few things. And the first thing is, take me back to that moment. Or describe to me blank, and start asking some of those questions. So the first thing is getting a core memory or something from your past, or something that you can relate to. So something that you're doing sometime when you were trying this skill and it didn't work. Because remember, people, just because somebody is an example of what to do, they can also be an example of what not to do. They're still really good examples. It works both ways. It works both ways. And it would probably be pretty easy for you to come up with some sort of an example of it's either direction. Okay. So come up with that story and then start taking yourself back to that moment. What was I feeling? What was I wearing? What was the smell? What place was I in? Was I comfortable? Was I uncomfortable? Start, using your senses, taking back to your senses and starting to use some of those to get yourself to that place, and then start asking yourself questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What am I in the middle of? That'll help you to take you back to that place. And most people can do this with some level of expertise. So that'll really help get that story out, and then write it down. It's going to be awful. That's fine. Go back and then read it again and refine it. Sometimes it takes a few times to get a story really right. there will come a point when it just will, it'll just make sense, and you'll see where those areas that you need to improve of are, and you'll be able to go back and do it. So some people it takes a few times through, some people can just do it, but just do it. I was talking to a client of mine earlier today, and they said sometimes done is better than perfect. Just do it. And you're still going to get, even if it's an okay story that you tell that was a personal relationship, or that was personally relatable to you, you're still going to do that. You're still getting that mastermind started. You're still doing something. You're still attracting people.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you bring in the bringing in the senses piece, because I feel like that is such an integral part. Even when I think of people that I've listened to that I really resonate with, it's being able to have them take me back through what they're doing and make some of those key little pieces that kind of pay attention to your imagination. Like I remember when we were at this beautiful lake with our family, and it was just, the sun was shining, like those pieces catch your attention, and then you kind of flow in the style. So I love that, bringing it back to the senses, because that is such an important part. And like you said too, we're looking for those pieces.
Yes.
And you brought up something a little bit earlier that I want to bring back up, just as a kind of a reminder for people, is what you said was, it doesn't necessarily have to be your story. It can be a story of someone else's. And I love that you said that. And I want to repeat that, because I feel like a lot of people get caught up in, well, what happened in my life? Where can I bring those out? Well, I don't feel like I have anything to tell. However, we experience things every single day and on a regular basis that can be a story that can be told, whether we were actually a part of it or we were just kind of the bird's eye view, but saw the entire situation. And what did that look like? What did we learn? What did it teach us, even while we were seeing outside of it?
Exactly. And I think it broadens what we do. It broadens our pool of stories significantly, where you can start, you have your own world here, but then now if I start using other people's stories, I can go beyond that. And sometimes we can kind of, we can come up with a story. So I have another good story, because I always have stories. I'm the story guy, right? I was in a car with Dan Clark, who's just like one of the top speakers in the world. And I was driving him from airport to venue. We were doing an event, and we were passing a strip mall with like one of those for lease signs on it. And he was telling me, he's like, you can make a story about this sign. You can make a story about anything. It's, it's something that you can do it from an authentic space, but you can come up with stories. It's not, it seems harder than it actually is. But again, if you use the framework that I said earlier, you can, it makes it easier to begin, to give that framework. I love frameworks. I have a framework for the keynotes that I use, and I use that framework to be able to help people. It's like training wheels on your bike, and it helps people to be able to at least get started with it. And so that's another thing, that you can do with stories too, is it some sort of a framework of take me back to that moment, ask a couple of questions. Yeah.
I love that. And let me ask you this. For those that, let's say, are trying the storytelling, do you feel like there is ever a moment where you share too much details, or you go too much into one thing that kind of drags the story out? Or do you feel like that's just kind of depends on who you are, how you tell your stories? Because I know that I've heard some people that kind of give those high level details, and I love listening to them. And then I have others that like really, really walk you through it, right? Like it may take an additional 10 minutes, but they really walk you through it. And so I've heard both ways. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is there ever a moment in your storytelling where you feel like there's too much detail? We could probably take a little bit out and still be able to hit those points.
It's situational, but yes, people sometimes have, what it is they're nervous. They think they have to tell everything. My grandfather used to have a really great saying. He said, I just asked for a glass of water. You don't have to turn the hose on me. I think that you can go too far. And what that is that's a sign of nervousness. You're in your head. So what I recommend with clients, or what I recommend, but anyone uses the framework that I have, is write it out and then sleep on it. And then the next day come back to it, and you'll be able to see if you're going far too deep into something. What it's going to really do is it comes down to, what is the goal? if I want to tell my entire backstory, I'm going to spend a lot of time on that backstory. If the backstory is really just there to back up another topic I'm talking about, it should be much shorter. So there isn't like a cut and fast rule about exactly how long a story should be, but we sort of have this sense of when things are getting too long. I mean, just as humans, we have this sense, and it's something that, if it seems like it's getting too long, it probably is. It might go back and see where you're trying to explain out of a sense of fear or anxiety versus from a place of authenticity.
Mm. I love that. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Being aware of that fear, make sure it's not your brain that's trying to keep you safe because you're trying to step outside of it and making sure that you understand the difference. And I love that you brought that up because I know that I used to be that person as well. I would always like over explain things because I felt like I wasn't giving enough detail or they weren't going to understand the reasons why I did what I did. So like I needed to explain it more and make sure that they understood my perception because, if they didn't understand it, then they weren't going to like me. If they didn't like me, that like this, you go down this whole rabbit hole. And I know any of you listening have done this, so don't tell me you haven't, but you go down this like whole rabbit hole. And what you find is you actually end up beating up on yourself. And so even when you go down that, finding that stopping point where you realize it, even if it's halfway down and being like, oh, nope. And crawling back out of that to make sure that you're really paying attention to that. And I know that like for me, for example, because I know I've talked with a lot of people that are like, I'd love to tell stories, but I can't write it out. It doesn't come out the same. Do you suggest that people that are more of a speaker than what they would consider themselves a writer, do you consider that they do things a little bit different and then turn it into what they're going to be telling the story on?
So I would recommend bullet points. Like even if I'm working with a client, I do have a script kind of that I use, but it's more, let me guide you in this direction. A lot of people have trouble writing a story. A written story is different than an oral story. They're two different skill sets. So I get it. Yep, it's difficult to write it out. Do bullet points. These are the things I need to hit in this sequence. Makes it a whole lot easier. So then I did this, then I did this, and maybe even like a timeline. That makes it a lot easier to do that. And it also stops over explaining because you'll see that the different things. And just remember, over explaining is a fear-based response, and understanding that really kind of helps that too. And the bullet pointing helps to get you out of that fear-based mode and into something a little bit more rational, a little bit more, objective.
I love that. The bullet points, that makes a lot of sense. I've actually used that before in some of my talks as well. One of my favorite things to do for me too, especially if I'm practicing it in the moment and not realizing if I am overdoing it because I'm just trying to get through it. I love to record it. Otter is one of my favorites. And then that way you can actually, listen back to it, hear your tone. And like for me, because I'm a musical person as well. So hearing things, I can fix my tones, tonality, like all that stuff once I hear it again. I do the same thing when I'm doing music. So that works really well for me as well, as being able to just hear it again and be like, oh yeah, that was not the tone I was trying to make, or I paused way too long, or I should have paused here. That would have made a difference. Like, so anybody that is more of an auditory person as well, I know that that's worked for me, is to be able, even if you're reading off the script, is just being able to kind of hear it and replay it again, because you will hear it a lot different than when you are speaking it and practicing it.
Exactly. And I think it's a really good idea to any keynote, always a good idea to record it like a Zoom or whatever it is. There was one client of mine, it was 9:00 p.m. It was him and I every night for like 2 weeks of just doing this. It was 90 minutes, this presentation. And we were in his event space, and that's all it was. And just hashing through it. What it allows you to do is to not only, it reduces the amount of stress you have. So when you have given this over and over again, it now comes to, you're now focused less on the words you're going to say, more on the message you're going to give. And so that's a good one. The Zoom also, just seeing yourself. We hate seeing ourselves. I hate seeing myself on Zoom. I've done it for years. I've been a virtual instructor-led trainer. I was using Zoom before Zoom was like a twinkle in its mother's eye. Even after almost 20 years of being on Zooms and stuff, I hate seeing myself on Zoom. I don't like it. What I did though is I forced myself to watch it, because it takes away that anxiety. If you're scared of something, confront it. And so it makes it a lot easier. I still don't like to watch myself, but as I got used to it, I'm like, dude, that's not anywhere near as bad as I thought it was. So it will help. It will help.
I
Yeah.
love that. And what does that do? That comes back to what we talked about earlier. That comes back to reaffirming in the brain what is actually true and basing it off of reality and not what the brain's storytelling is making for you. I love that. And I know that I try to do that with my podcast as well. If I'm on other podcasts, just to kind of listen to some of those things. And I'm the same way, even being in the singing space for years, I hated having
Mhm.
to re-listen to myself. You're also your own worst critic, right? So you're going to pick things apart. This could have been better. That could have been better, whatever the case may be. But I love that because, like, you know, like you're saying, you're forcing yourself to confront it, and it also gives you a moment to face the actual reality and be like, okay, so was it that bad? Did
Yeah.
I really screw up that much? And again, reframing the way that your brain sees it, because, you know, again, this comes back to the brain is meant to keep you safe. So it wants to stay here behind closed doors. And so anytime that you step outside of it, it's going to keep telling you those stories, even if they're not relevant anymore, because that's how it's always viewed it. So you have to have the capability to be able to reprogram that new view and move that door forward per se, so that your brain can protect you, but maybe in a different manner where you're like, okay, but this is okay. We can push the boundary forward.
Mhm. And I think that leads to a much bigger thing. Just as entrepreneurs, it leads to a much bigger story that we have, or a much bigger lesson. That took me a long time to learn. I grew up in a very fear-based world, and just fear was constantly there, and anxiety, and that sort of preservationist mindset of things. And
Mm,
when I finally heard somebody say, "The only way out is through," and that really helped me to grow as a person, because I realized I am always going to have anxiety. I was joking with a friend of mine the other day that as entrepreneurs, our base level of anxiety is most people's panic. We're used to a totally different level of anxiety that we have. And in order to handle it, the only way to effectively handle a huge amount of anxiety is to face it and to look at it. And I know as part of
mm,
your story, Kat, that was one of the things that you had to do, was to actually face that fear, face that moment, confront it, and handle it. There's a freeing part once you've done that. There's something that happens where you just feel like, oh, cool, I can take on the world right now. And
yep.
maintaining that is an awesome thing. Being able to
Yeah.
maintain that is, I think, one of the reasons why entrepreneurs can work for millions of hours, and we get really obsessive. And that's what we're doing, is we have learned how to confront and handle whatever we have. Yep.
Yep. And to me, that is the ultimate control, right? I know that for me personally, years ago, control, in my opinion, then was controlling my schedule, controlling what my kids did, control where I went, control what happened in my life. And then when I didn't, things just went haywire. But you are so totally right. Being able to confront your fears, like that is the ultimate control, because you learn to control how your body reacts in those specific situations. And then that way, no matter what happens, because you're always going to have hiccups, right? You can have a really beautiful week, month, year. Crap's always going to hit the fan. Like it just is what it is, right? That is life. But being able to be in that type of control makes such a huge difference in how you handle the situation, how you move through the situation, and not necessarily just being stuck and frozen in it, like I was for years. Yeah. So you're so right. I love that.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of those things that as entrepreneurs, and one thing that I've really appreciated about being an entrepreneur is that I am a significantly stronger person because of it. Because again, our baseline level of stress, and we're used to handling everything. We're used to handling a lot of stuff that goes wrong. But having that fundamental understanding in your heart of hearts that no matter what happens, I will figure out a way to make it happen and to make it go
Mm,
right, and to overcome this, is an amazing, amazing sense of freedom just in that fact alone. And I wish more people would be able to see it, because, then literally no matter what happens, I'm going to figure it out.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. Now, as we come to a close, you know, I have one question that I always ask all of my guests. But before we get to that question, I know that you had something you wanted to gift to the audience as well. So would you like to share a little bit about that? Because I think this is really cool.
Absolutely. So I have been doing just presentations in general for almost 20 years. I have seen just about everything. I've seen all kinds. I've seen them done well. I've seen them not done well. So I've seen the examples of what to do and the examples of what not to do. So what I've done is I've boiled everything down that I've learned over 20 years into 5 tips of how to do a better presentation. And I want to give it that way to all of your listeners. I'll give a link so that way you guys will be able to do it and download that. And I want to make sure that all you folks have it because I think it'll really help. My mission is to eradicate bad presentations. And so I want to, this is my little gift to the world that I'd like to give, saying, here's a better way to do it because your presentation should never upstage you. They're the backup singers. And I think people get really addicted to stuff that I call visual junk food. That's like the wall of bullet points and all kinds of stuff, these huge diagrams that nobody's going to ever remember. What that does is it detracts from your message. And I think that's the worst part. Is instead of listening to you and your message, which is very, very important, people are worried more about, I'm going to read it all through these bullet points. I'm going to take a look at this really bad graphic. I'm going to, I can't read that header. I have no idea. They're going to check out. And I think that's a huge disservice to you. So anyway, I want to give that away to them. You guys will have it available to you. And I think it'll really help to significantly increase the amount. They're simple steps. There's nothing too difficult about them, but they will really take your presentations to a next level.
Oh, I love that so much. And of course, we'll have that information in the show notes for you guys. But thank you, Andrew, so much for that. Okay, so my question that I ask all of my guests, do you happen to have a quote or piece of advice you would like to leave the audience with?
Can I actually take this in a wee bit of a different direction?
Ooh, sure.
Because I was always the people pleaser. And so I was always the person that just felt like I had to do something for other people versus doing what I needed to do. And boundaries are beautiful is something I had to learn later in life. There was one book that I had called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And I have never felt more judged and understood by a book in my life. And so instead of just giving one little piece of advice that might be applicable to one specific thing, I think I see so many people with nice guy or nice girl syndrome. And I think and I see a lot of people suffering with it. And so I want to leave people with that. The book is No More Mr. Nice Guy. I've got to remember the author. But anyway, I'd like to leave you guys with that. I would say if you are having an issue where you feel like you're just a doormat, you feel like you're being walked all over, you feel like you're just doing something and you get super resentful afterwards going, why the hell did I just do that? You need to read this book. And it's very straightforward. I'm reading through it going, yep, I'm that guy. Yep, I'm that guy. Yep, I'm that guy. Yep, I'm that guy. Just totally feeling judged. I get it. And it was creepy. I'm like, why are you in my head? I want to leave people with that because I think it's something that really helped me out and had a significant impact. And I think it would help you listeners as well.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Okay. We'll have that information in the show notes as well for you guys to be able to find that. I am actually super interested in that. I add another book to my collection of books. So Andrew, do us all a favor then. Tell everybody, how can they be around you? How can they be in your world? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. Best place to get a hold of me is Instagram. Absolutely the best place to do it. I do post regularly. I do have my own podcast that I'll post there as well. So Instagram is at Andrew Chesnutt. It's spelled weird, CHESNUTT. Or at Nickel City Learning Solutions. That's my company. I'll give you those so that you have them so you can follow me on there. I would love it if you did that. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can take a look at me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Of course, everybody will have all that information in the show notes. Everything will be linked up. His handles will be in there too. So you can follow, like, and share and be in Andrew's world. So Andrew, again, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Pat, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm honored to be a guest. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys got some amazing takeaways. If you have not thought about downloading his 5 tips to do a better presentation, boy, you better hop in that one. We will have that link inside of the show notes as well. I feel like we can always improve regardless of how great we think that we are or learn something from a different perspective. So definitely be sure to take advantage of that free gift that he's going to be giving you guys. And until next time, don't forget, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. So until next time, have a fantastic day. Hello again, and thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought tons of value, we ask that you please share, like, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to reach even more inspiring entrepreneurs who can benefit from these powerful conversations. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, as this feedback is an amazing gift that fuels our growth and helps us to continually improve this podcast. Looking for an extra dose of inspiration and empowerment? Then be sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me at The Lotus Effect, where I share valuable resources and tips while sharing my own journey of being an entrepreneur. And if you're interested in learning more about my coaching programs and services, be sure to check out my website at the-lotus-effect.com. Once again, thank you so much for being a part of Real Chat with Kat. Your presence and support makes all the difference. Remember, whether you find yourself in the depths of the mud or on the path of growth, we all have a unique journey. And just like the lotus, some of us start in the dirtiest of mud, yet as we rise and grow, we blossom into something beautiful, unique, and truly one of a kind. To all of my visionaries out there, keep rising and growing as you create your own Lotus Effect.